So, the, the question I wanted to ask you today, and I often think of this, when you say that the story isn't much, but the gameplay is great of a certain game. What does that mean?
Um, okay, so when I'm playing a game or making a game, there are two parts to the equation. One is just the pure gameplay of the game. If it's a board game, how the cards interact with each other, how competitive or cooperative the game is, and what the gameplay fun aspect of the game is. But with every mechanic, with every choice of card, with every image, every icon on the game is telling a story. It's giving you an experience, and the story could be as small as preparing food in a kitchen, or as large as conquering continents. And the narrative angle a game takes, be it chess or be it Shasan or be it Axis and Allies, is more than half of the experience for me. It's a very large chunk of the experience. You can usually see that the same mechanics are being used across games, but to what effect? Am I planting wheat and growing food for people, or am I conquering land that otherwise didn't belong to me? So those are two lenses I look at when I play a game, and sometimes they don't match. Sometimes what the gameplay is cute and charming, but the story is a whitewashing or a watered down version of a historical crime. It's like it's been made into a plaything.
But you often say that there's something to be said about antagonistic game design, which is do with putting yourself in the place of an antagonist.
But while at the same time making yourself aware that you are the antagonist.
Give an example of this.
Okay, one of the most common genres of games, be it tabletop games or video games, is something called 4X games. That's explore, expand, exterminate, and I forgot the 4X. Sorry, it's a 4X game. And 4X game, you are the hero on a crusade of sorts, conquering lands from savages. I can't begin to tell you how many games make it so that you are the hero of that story and not the villain as it should be. If the same game spoke about the pain of the people you're conquering, or spoke of you as a tyrant,
and not a single game does this.
Few games do this, but most of the games in the 4X genre, you are the exploiter. You're the exterminator, and that's not a bad thing.
Within the game,
within the game, or even in the player's mind.
So the experience that the player gets is like, oh, I killed a few workers over there because I had to, and it's really
workers are resources. The natives are savages that need to be, of course, taken care of, or barbarians.
So this is like just completely standard game design.
That is largely the standard practice. It's changing in the last couple of years. In the last few years, it has been changing. People are more aware of the stories they tell, and that is something that we try to do even at Mimesis. It's very we understand the reason we make stories is because we understand stories are powerful. Now, once you do understand stories are powerful, how can you, in the same breath, be callous with the stories you select? So I'm going to turn the question around on you. When you're writing a script, or when you're watching a film, or when you are supporting another creator's vision, I'm sure there's no blanket rule of what is a good story.
Yeah.
But what do you look for from an ideological, political framework? Let's start with that and get into creative and other things later. That makes the story worth telling for you.
So philosophically, the one question that I ask every author that over the years that I've participated with or worked with is what is it that really matters to them, and why are they making that film? And that is really the most important question that most people have forgotten to ask themselves. It takes 2 to 3 years of your life to make a film, and that's a lot of investment from you to do something. Now you could be very honest to yourself and you can say that, hell, I'm making a film just because I think I really need to get out and do something, or I need to just tell a story, any story. I don't even care what that story is. I just want to showcase my skill, my ability to be able to tell a story really well to the world. That's okay. That's fair enough. That,
or as a job maybe.
Or it's just a job for me. Or it could be something else, which is the case that I look for, which is that this insight, this worldview, this way of looking at the world, this way of looking at life, this way of looking at the relationship between myself and the universe really matters to me. I feel so fortunate to have come upon it finally, or have distilled it down over the years of my life. I wish I knew this when I was younger. I wish someone told me this in an easier way, and I'd not had to struggle so hard to kind of get to this insight.
Okay.
If that's the answer, then that really interests me immediately. That excites me immediately.
Okay. To be devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Something could excite an author. Something could be the author's truth. But you might not agree with it. I'm not saying the nuance of it. It might be completely opposing to your worldview.
Yeah.
And maybe an extreme version of it would be something you consider vile or harmful or hateful.
Yeah.
So is just being devil's advocate.
Yeah, of course not. I mean, anything that is harmful to people, I feel responsible. I feel very responsible as a storyteller to never say that. I feel that we should never invest in even showing hatred in a way that stays ambiguous. Showing crime in a way that stays ambiguous. If I'm a very prescriptive, almost a didactic author, and you know this, and that's probably my biggest criticism out there. That I think there is a deep responsibility there, and I definitely would not amplify anything, amplify any voice that's hateful or that's prejudiced towards a group of people. So of course that's like a basic hygiene principle.
So how different can the author's world be, what author you're working with, be it a co-author, be it someone you're supporting, someone you are partnering with, how different can their voice get before it gets outside your comfort zone as a collaborator?
So within a realm of rational thought, within a realm of rational inquiry, within a realm of philosophical pursuit, there is quite a large spectrum there itself. Within the realm of what we can call a progressive way of looking at life, which basically means a non-predatory, non-violent, non-stealing way of living life. Within that itself, there is a pretty large spectrum of how to go about it. And within that, there can be many disagreements. Like Pankaj and I have always been in disagreement about so many things, but definitely our central worldview. Pankaj's would, it would be reductive to call it spiritual, but for paucity of time, that would be an okay word to use. His is almost coming from a sense of this intuitive feeling that there is this
an openness to etherealness.
Yes, which I don't have. I'm extremely scientific in my approach. If it's not observed, if it's not formulated, if it's not observed a million times over and over again in lab conditions,
a hypothesis without any basis would not be entertained.
Would not be very exciting. Would not be very compelling for me. So that's a disagreement we always have, or like on a daily basis on while working as well. On literally in Ship of Theseus, in Tumbad, in anything that Pankaj and I have done even before that continuum, we'd have these arguments endlessly. So that's fine. And similarly for authors that we participate with, it's as long as it's a genuine piece of inquiry. But the more important piece is how it's told, of course. I mean, this is really the first most important piece, and the second very important piece is the how of it.
Okay.
And for me, again, it's a matter of personal taste sometimes. But for me, it's extremely important that that cinematic immersion is never challenged. So I'm not a huge fan of
Breaking the
fourth wall for the sake of it. I mean, again, you can use these tools. There are all these devices there's this vocabulary of cinematic syntax that you can deploy for whatever purpose. But a lot of filmmakers think that is the form is the content, the form is the story. And I think that's a very short-term view of story, because that's a form is a story in rebellion with the dominant form, with the incumbent form, and that's how short-lived it will be. Hence, whereas if your story is your story, and form is an immersive experience of that story. And to make that immersive experience, I think there are two things that are very, very important for me: believability and unpredictability.
Got it.
Now, these two almost, are contradictory. If it's believable, means it's familiar, means that you have seen it sufficient number of times to look
understand
at it
the
and
grammar.
to look at it and say, this happens. I know this happens because I've seen it over and over again. But when you've seen it over and over again, you can also predict it.
Got it.
So the nice sweet spot for me always is on a moment-to-moment basis in film, not in the entire film. I'm not talking about a plot in like a larger arc of the
suspension
film,
of disbelief.
but I'm talking about the moment-to-moment of it.
Got it.
Where your immersion is complete. It should be absolutely fantastically driven by the moment-to-moment design of believability and.
So can you give me an example of a film where the story is not, for lack of a better term, a real story, but it's completely believable? The audience has suspended your disbelief completely and made you live and breathe that world throughout the film without breaking your attention for a second. And two, a film where the author breaks the fourth wall and it just worked for you.
The author breaks I'll answer the latter, because the first one is 100 great films. Of course, I can name
three.
Well, I mean, anything from Court to Prestige, let's say, right? Chaitanya's Court is extremely believable, and still it is an extremely distilled worldview. Prestige, on the other hand, has a different kind of emotion, it's a different kind of believability. It's designed, it's extremely designed, it's extremely performed.
He's playing with the timeline too.
It's
non-linear,
extremely playful with its non-linearity, and yet it doesn't. And there is meta. There is a very clear meta. It begins with a prestige.
It begins with the solve.
It begins with the solve. It begins with the prestige. It begins with the promise, and then it goes into the very and the act is almost declared to you through the voice of Michael Caine.
Yeah.
So it has a very clear meta. It has a very the director is communicating with you, but still managing to not be didactic, still managing to not be to not break your immersion. In fact, there is a decision that Nolan made that I quite appreciate in The Prestige. In the book, they go to watch a film, and they're going out. They're going to watch a film, but in the film, they're watching a play together. So that I think is a very, very interesting, or an opera.
Okay.
So that I think is a very good and interesting decision.
Why is that?
Because it does not break your immersion. When you suddenly watch a bunch of people watching a film,
you're
suddenly reminded of your own presence in the space, and that was an important tool, was an interesting tool for a little while, but it's never fascinated me quite. I don't want the audience to come out of that immersion. So I think that's a very good decision that Nolan made at that point, and that's just an example of the former.
One of the 100 films that you would.
Yeah. The latter would be the example where the filmmaker has constantly broken the fourth wall, so to speak, and still managed to create complete immersion through his lens of empathy, through his lens of, I can go on and on. There can be an entire episode about this film itself. Is Close-Up, is Kiarostami's Close-Up, where that happens so in such a powerful way. You get into the life of a character, and then he gets all these people that he's who are his subjects. He's making a documentary about them. He gets them to stage their own life, stage the events that led up to that event. The courtroom is a documentary, but all the events that led up to the courtroom are played by the very same people, and that's just like incredible. He's breaking all the walls. In fact, not just the fourth wall. He's breaking like any
The
one
line,
principle
the line between documentary and fiction.
And fiction, the line between how much a filmmaker's influence is going to inform the story. It does, is everyone behaving?
And the film is about a filmmaker.
Huh?
The film is about a filmmaker.
And the film is about a filmmaker. Absolutely, it's about about a guy posing as Mahalbaf, and it just asks so many incredible questions about the nature of this medium and how it informs our lives in a very meta way, in a very real way. It is the filmmaker's presence in the courtroom, informing every member of the courtroom with the filmmaker's worldview of empathy. Would they have been any lesser empathetic had he not been present with his camera? So many fascinating questions come up because of that, and it still not for a moment loses its immersion. Just I'll need an entire essay on reconstructing how it manages to do that.
How close-up works.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. So what else? It's a leading question, but is every author suited for telling every story?
We've learned the hard way that that's not the truth. We have learned it that, in my own personal experience, we have seen over and over again that when an author comes to me and if I take the liberty of saying, okay, I'm going to write and produce this for you, and you go ahead and direct it, it's taken a while to learn that doesn't really necessarily work always.
Okay.
Because when I write for myself, I write for my vision.
Got it. And how you would direct it?
And how I would direct it. Of course, there are screenwriters who can write for other people to direct, and there are directors who can take other people's material
and work with that.
And work with that. Somehow, in my case, that hasn't worked. So I think most good authors can tell all kinds of stories because they'll find themselves in that story. They'll find a way to bridge the gap between where they are and where the story is, and create some kind of a bridge of empathy and bridge of philosophy that allows them to tell that story. That earns them the right to tell that story. But most authors don't realize that that's an important step to take.
And apart from that, do you think some authors, just by their lived experiences, are better suited for subjects, characters, worldviews?
I think there are good authors and there are not so good authors.
Okay.
At the end of the day, it's got nothing to do with being better suited for a certain subject. I think a good author should be able to tell any story really well. There is so much evidence in cinema where really good authors have taken on very varied subjects. Kubrick, Tarkovsky, Spielberg even, and have made each of these stories that they've taken on their own, very much their own. Tarkovsky Solaris, hence, is so completely different from a Soderbergh Solaris, for example, right? Which is Tarkovsky Solaris is almost it's an ethereal spiritual experience. It's a very deep, visceral experience that just cannot be laid down in words. You have to see it over and over again, and it kind of really just becomes a part of you, like a dream seen a million times. And then it just grows into you, it expands into you. It has a very, very unique chemistry, which is just impossible to kind of really define in words. Whereas Soderbergh's Solaris, for example, is extremely rational American storytelling, and you can see in this case, in the case of Solaris especially, Tarkovsky's version. Of course, works would be a small word to put there. It really profoundly moves you and changes you from inside. Whereas Soderbergh's Solaris tells you what the story is, or that's at best. So, I think, and both are, in this case, I'm talking about a very good storyteller. I'm talking about Soderbergh, who to my mind fails in some way in telling the story of Solaris, because it needs that spiritual quest. It needs that quest of inquiry. It needs that, because it's a story of transcendence. At the heart of it, it's a story of transcendence. It cannot be told without flirting with transcendence.
Okay.
You know. So but I would still think that, I mean, if I were to tell the same story, I would be somewhere right in
Smack in the middle.
Back in the middle in my approach to it. I would be, of course, I would not attempt such a daredevil stunt as trying to do Solaris. But if I were to kind of approach a similar territory, which we almost do in every story that we write, I would definitely think that it would be rational and yet speculative. And the speculation will be reasoned out. Speculation will be based on a certain rational worldview. So in Solaris, you have to believe a few things. In Solaris, you have to believe that there is such a thing as this sea that changes your neurochemistry and makes you see a person that from your memory, really creates a person from your memory, and this person starts becoming real, has their own memories, it's almost like like that Jorge Luis Borges story where they
come to life.
Yeah, this person is dreaming and he's talking and is thinking about how his dreams manifest and how they must be feeling, and soon enough he realizes that he's somebody else's dream. Much like Blade Runner, for example, and there's like a running theme of identity and existence.
And yeah, we'll get into that in some other episode.
Yeah, I mean, the moment you start talking about Solaris, the moment you start talking about any of the things that we care about, it's difficult to not get very dense very quickly. What are the things that we look for? Okay, let's kind of really bring it down to what are the things that we look for in a project, in a game or a film or a show or anything that we take up to produce.
I fundamentally, on the onset, ask 3 questions, and then there are 3 million that follow. Is what is the story you're telling? And that's also an inquiry that has 20 sub questions. But what is the story you're telling? Fundamentally, what is it about? Who is it talking about? What world does it come from? Secondly is who is telling the story. To me, it really matters who is telling the story, because, and this is something we have written in our company manifesto of sorts, and we talk about a lot. It's very important to change the author.
Yeah. To change the narrative, you change the narrative.
Change the narrative. Change the narrative. We need to find and nurture great narrators from spaces where there haven't been the opportunity to create any.
Right.
And tell their story from their perspective in a lot of ways. And the third thing is, why should it be told right now? And this is how I look at it. It's if you were to look at Maslow's pyramid, it's for a lot of people it's very important to self-actualize, tell a story that they really want to tell, a story that's important to them and is deeply personal. And I think that's very important. But we're also living in a time and space where resources, even though it might seem otherwise, to tell important stories are very, very scarce.
Yeah.
So in a space where resources are scarce, where every sentence in every paragraph matters, because there's so few gems coming out, I, as a producer, as a facilitator, ask the question, why is it, of all the things you're saying, does the world need this right now?
Yeah.
And maybe in better times, maybe in times of plenty, you can tell things that matter only to you.
And there are other media that you can use.
Yeah.
I mean, media that are lesser resource expensive.
Exactly.
You can use blogs, and people do very well doing that. People tell personal stories and personal worldviews.
In better times, please use cinema for just exploration of the soul. But the exploration of far more tangible things that could solve hunger, that are far more important.
So ours is a very utilitarian approach when looking at cinema.
Definitely, I would define myself as a utilitarian.
We look at what kind of impact it can have, what kind of conversations it can inform, what kind of behaviors it can inform, etc.
Limited resources, how do you maximize them?
Right. So there is a resource utility to it, and the utility that we deprioritize or we deprivilege a little bit is perhaps the utility of transcendence for the author.
Because it's, to put it very crudely, it's the prior benefits more people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not crude at all. I think it's fair that the transcendence of an individual is an individual's quest and an individual's journey and their own desire to find a medium in which they can translate their own consciousness, their own worldview, their memories, and distill and kind of store it for it to live on even after they are gone. And that's the promise of transcendence, of writing a line or two. That's from Leonard Cohen. He says, everybody knows that they'll live forever. If they've done a line or two. And here, doing a line or two is a pun. Yeah, it's a wordplay. Yeah. So if you've done a line or two, of course you know that you would live forever. There is a part of you that will live on through what you have written.
It's funny, right? How genes are not fragile and means anti-fragile.
Well, I mean, this idea of anti-fragile, you're right about that. But like I was talking to Avi the other day, and I was saying that the human body is so fragile, right? Like it's extremely fragile. You drop it from a height and it splatters like a balloon. So it's a very, very fragile kind of shell that we have. And so I was always confused about why is life called anti-fragile, and why is why
because the gene lives, life itself lives on. Yeah.
So the meme on
the ant might die, but the ants will live on.
Right. So the meme on the other hand, what would you call it, fragile or anti-fragile? What is it?
The modern meme I would call anti-fragile.
Because it adapts so much.
It adapts so much, and there's so much space to store so much information without necessarily curating for what needs to be. The resource cost for keeping a meme alive is very low.
So the selection pressure is low in any case. Everything exists.
The species is anti-fragile, but the individual isn't.
Oh, the species of memes
of humans is anti-fragile, but I as an individual am fragile. But the ideas I create will most likely definitely be able to be consumed after I'm gone.
They'll adapt, they'll voraciously change,
they'll find new contexts.
They'll get attached to, they'll become LLs and get attached to completely new ideas. Ideas that you have not even imagined they'll get attached to or get associated with.
And perhaps my impact on it would be so watered down it's almost indiscernible.
Right.
But still there.
Right. So
this conversation is going all over the place.
Yeah, it's correct. How much time do we have, by the way? Oh, we are almost done for today.
Yes.
So the points being, what do we look for? I think we should give out like.
I give my 3 bits. What are your 3 bits?
So what we look for is essentially this. We look for what philosophical problem you're solving for, and how chronic or acute that philosophical problem is to the world today. How relevant is it right now? How relevant is it going to be 10, 20, 30 years from now? That's something that I'm very, very invested in as a person when I'm producing something.
So the second is long-term relevance, not just in the moment.
Long-term relevance and how it's going to be increasingly important as we go along, right? And that's something that I'm always very invested in. The second thing that really matters to me is how well distilled this idea is. What kind of an allegory, what kind of a metaphorical framework you created around it. Because you can't, it's not a talk, it's not a lecture, it's not, you can't have.
How do you structure and encapsulate the story?
In a beautiful fable, in a beautiful allegory that becomes a great vehicle, that becomes a very consistent vehicle for this philosophical quest to be carried through.
So nourishment is important, but how do you cook your food?
How do you cook your food? I mean, what's your recipe? That's absolutely the most important. That your nutrients are important. That you're coming onto the table with all this wonderful, fresh produce from your own farm that you have dug up. That you have farmed.
But how do you mix them and blend them in a way that?
What's your recipe? How are you going to create this flow, this cadence of events, especially events? Something that people forget increasingly, that scenes should be made of clear events. You throw your characters in unpredictable situations and they come out with unpredictable behaviors that are still extremely consistent and believable for your audiences. And that's really the cusp that I find most missing in screenplays that we read. So that's the other thing that I look out for, the how of it, the craft of it, I think. Then of course there are smaller things. There is how compelling is your character's journey, how compelling is the insight at the end of it, at the end of the film, how interesting, and interesting is like such a broad word.
Yeah, such a, yeah.
How much playfulness
And
do I see?
inventiveness.
How much inventiveness, how much playfulness. Have you earned your tropes? I mean, that's something that I keep talking about.
We'll talk about that at length later.
We'll talk about it later. Like, just to give an example to it, that if you're making an action film, of course you want one shot. Like, it's almost a given that you want a shot where the hero of the story, your protagonist, has blown up something behind them and it's blowing up and they're walking into the camera. You may want to do that shot. It's classic. It's a beautiful shot. But have you earned it for this particular moment? What have you done as a writer to completely reinvent it as an author?
And for the audience, do you think that this was
The first time this happened. This was the only believable moment, rendition of this moment I've ever seen. That's really important. So that's what I mean when I say, have you earned your tropes? So there are a lot of these principles, guiding principles. I think we can do another episode.
Yeah, we
about
can
the
do
guiding
that.
principles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
for joining us and sending your questions.
Yes.
We'll try to answer them in the next episode.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye. See you. Done?